Just waiting to see if people will come in here. Well, while I'm waiting for somebody to come in to join in the chat, I want to welcome everybody to my new channel dedicated to older fans of Sesame Street that miss the good old days of Sesame Street. We're talking Mr. Hooper, Olivia, Linda, Bob, and so on and so forth. And we cannot forget the late, great Jim Henson, the guy who helped make Sesame Street what it is. I think if it weren't for Jim Henson and Bob finally getting the urge to, or the encouragement to go and meet Jim Henson back in the day, I don't think we would have a classic show like what we would have today. But as I've said, this channel is not for kids. I think we ought to have frank conversations about some of the episodes, the careers of some of the actors and actresses that appeared on the show. And I might do a little segment about Jim Henson in the future, but I don't know. It just depends on how things go. This year has been really sucky within the last 3 to 4 years. I know we heard about when the last 2 original cast members were let go, along with Emilio Delgado and Roscoe Orman. And that to me is pure bullshit, because I think we all saw what greed can do to a person. In fact, I'm pretty familiar with it in terms of my older brother, who lost his job during the course of the pandemic. First, it was being furloughed. Then the furniture store he worked at said, they'll absorb you into the company and send you to another place in town. Then he gets notice that his job no longer exists, and if he wanted to finish selling off the last of their bedding, he would have to give back his pension. And my brother told him where to go and how high to jump. And he's been from one job to another because at his age, he's in his 50s. I don't think very many people want to hire older people that have been at a job for a long time. Like my brother worked at Macy's Furniture here in Columbus since he got out of high school around 1984 or 85. So yeah, that's a long time. And when I heard that Bob McGrath and the other cast members got let go due to HBO not wanting to renew contracts, and they cut down the show from 50 plus minutes to 25 to 30 minutes. And that is a shot in the heart for those of us that grew up with the show. I know there are some out there that remember Matt Robinson as the first Gordon, but I remember when Luis and Susan and Olivia were on the show, and there was a certain chemistry that came together. Sure, Matt Robinson didn't stay on the show for very long, a couple of years. Then he did a character called Roosevelt Franklin, and then when he left the show, they had to find some new people to come in and kind of diversify the cast a little more. And from what I heard, there were some stations in the country that didn't like the fact that the show was so diverse. And to me, that is very confusing to me, because I always believed that we are the great American melting pot, or the great world melting pot. Because if we were all one thing, we would be very boring, very bland. But it takes the right kind of chemistry to bring people together. And whoever hired on Bob and the other cast really hit the nail on the head in terms of a good, diverse community that we could all aspire to be, even with a green little grouch that was such a pain in the butt, and a bright-eyed music teacher, and a deaf librarian, along with a young black man that was going to the police academy or going to law school to study law. And over the years, they've had many, many great storylines. I think one of Bob's best stories, there's a lot of them, but he said the Goodbye Mr. Hooper episode is one of the best ones that had come out because it showcased the death of a human being. Yet, rather than replace Will Lee as Mr. Hooper, they decided to showcase Mr. Hooper as passed away. And it's the most brilliant piece of television history you'll see on that program. And I came across an article not too long ago, and I'll have to find it tomorrow when I'm not so tired. But I spent the last couple of weeks looking for videos and trying to put together a tribute. And I was going through some articles that I had found online where I think they interviewed Bob McGrath for some type of an online article, and they talked about how they asked him if he had seen Will Lee just before he died. And Bob said that he was probably one of the last ones to see him in the hospital just shortly before he died. I heard that a few days before that, he was in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And that shows stamina, and that shows that even in his ill health, Will Lee was stronger than most people gave him credit for. Even though his body was failing him, he still did that parade, and a few days later, he would be in the hospital where he would die. But Bob said the last time he saw Will Lee was he went to the hospital and he talked to one of the nurses who said that they could not get Will Lee to urinate in a urinal. And the nurse was doing everything she could to try to get him to go to the bathroom. And Bob said to Will, he said, if you can urinate, if you're able to urinate, we will dedicate the next show to you with the letter P. And even though Mr. Lee was hooked up to all those tubes and wires and machines, he was pretty sick, but he somehow managed to smile. He couldn't speak much, but it really lifted up the nurse who saw a man that was really, really ill perk up for one moment to have that moment of joy before he died. So, yeah. I think the scariest thing is that when you see something like that, it really makes you think of your mortality. Because I remember my dad, before he died in 2009, he seemed like he was out of it. I woke up to find my twin brother standing at the door, keeping an eye on my dad while my mom called an ambulance, and they were going to leave me here at home. And I'm like, no, I'm going to the hospital with you. You're not leaving me behind, not this time. And they got him to the ER, and he sat there for hours, as did we. I went and got something to drink and maybe a snack, and then I came back, sat there for about another hour, and then I had to go to the bathroom. I went into the restroom that was in the ER area, and when they put the catheter in to get him to drain, you could hear that he was in pain, and it broke my heart. But he went from sitting up to eating. In a matter of days, he went from sitting up to eating to being on a breathing machine and then totally out of it by the end of his life. But back to Bob, having to do the Goodbye Mr. Hooper episode. He had to try and get through that. They had to explain to the little ones that were home during Thanksgiving, of all times. They had to explain to a young child how the proprietor or the owner of Mr. Hooper's store was no longer here. And the tears you see in that are absolutely 100% real. And I think the person who felt it the most was not only Carol, but I think Bob McGrath. And I think he had a lot of things spinning through his mind, like thinking about the last time he saw Will Lee. And Carol Spinney said the last time he saw Will Lee was the last day on the set. In fact, somebody's got the final scene of Mr. Hooper up on YouTube. You can go and find it, but I'm not going to share it here for now. But Carol said that he took one look at Will and he said, "Will looked awful purple to me." So I walked over in my Big Bird leg pants and feet and put my arm around him and said, "I love you, Mr. Looper." And Will Lee turned to his colleague and said, "I love you too, Carol." And Carol Spinney said, "That was our goodbye." And that just hits hard in the gut. And these last few months have been a blur, at least for me. I didn't grieve right away because I had my own stresses in terms of doctor's appointments and getting my wheelchair fixed and not really having the chance to relax because I had to call and get my parts for my wheelchair ordered, and it takes about a month or a couple of months because I had a heck of a time getting my chair fixed, and I had to look for the serial number on my wheelchair, and when I found it finally, I had to get the payment and everything together. And thank goodness for Care Credit because that helps out with the bills. So, yeah, I'm trying to pay that off too. And once I got all my wheelchair stuff taken care of and had a chance to really calm down after that, I think the last week or so, the dam finally burst in terms of shock and all that stuff. And there was one night I was watching stuff on YouTube through my TV, and as Fozzie once said in The Great Muppet Caper, the cookie jar just busted. And I spent a whole day in bed earlier this week, just thinking about all the times I used to watch Sesame Street as a kid, and even seeing Don't Eat the Pictures when it was out on videotape, and Christmas Eve on Sesame Street. One of the best Christmas specials, in my opinion. No offense to Daniel Tiger and all the new stuff that's out now, but Christmas Eve on Sesame Street's a good one. And then there was another one that Sesame Street did that had a cameo with a walk on from Michael Jackson and Anne Marie, who sang You Needed Me on that one. Both Christmas specials are good, but Christmas Eve on Sesame Street is the one most people will remember. I do have the book. I do have the show on digital platform. Um, I think that's one of their best ones. And then you hear about characters like Alana Reed, who played Olivia. She was in that Follow That Bird, and it had Bob McGrath. I think Bob McGrath is my favorite character because he personified a good man who had a good heart and wanted kids to really learn and be respectful, and there was just a certain magical quality about Bob. I can't explain it. It's just like if you look at him, you could tell there's a goodness around him, like a good aura about him. And I'm sure a lot of little girls had massive crushes on him when they were kids. I probably did, but I don't know because I was so young. But I do remember going to school in the early years of my schooling. They used to roll a big clunky TV on a cart, and they used to have these things called rabbit ears. It's not digital cable. Okay, they used to have these old clunky things called rabbit ears, and they would have to adjust them. And if we really wanted to see the TV screen, they would have to turn the lights off, and we would all gather around that big stand and sit and watch Sesame Street. I just think that anytime Bob came on, you knew a good portion of the stories was going to be good. I think my favorite one in recent years, in the more recent time, there was one where Zoe wanted to spend the day with Bob. And you could tell there was a chemistry there between Zoe, the Muppet, and Bob, the music teacher / best friend. In fact, the picture that you see is the icon at the top of the page just shows that. I think the shot was from the Around the Corner video where he sang about just around the corner. But there was always something about Bob. Kids just flocked to him, and I think a lot of it has to do with his personality, because Bob once said that he went into Sesame Street not knowing what to expect. He did not really want to do the show until he got a couple of calls. The first time they called him to see if they wanted him to, if he wanted to do the show, he said at first, not in the slightest, because he was trying to get his music career going here in the States, because a lot of people don't know Bob McGrath's early career because he was on Sing Along with Mitch, and Mitch Miller hired him on as one of the singers, and Mitch Miller liked him so much he started getting solo spots. And I guess Mitch Miller saw a lot of potential in Bob and decided to help him with a solo record. And it's Mitch Miller presents Bob McGrath. And they said the show ran for 4 years on an NBC, what is now the Peacock. And when the show went off the air, a station over in Japan picked up that show and it took off like wildfire. It wasn't just popular. A lot of the younger set was watching the show, and people over there, especially young teenagers, would set up fan clubs dedicated to Bob McGrath. So, yeah, Bob McGrath became somewhat of a teen idol sensation. That's pretty cool if you really think about it. And he did tours for a number of years. And when they asked him to come back and tour again toward the end of the 60s, he's like, I don't think so. He says, I want to take my wife, go back stateside and see what I could do with my career and see where that takes me. That's when he got the first call about a new show, and it's supposed to feature some guy by the name of Jim Henson. At first, he didn't want to do it. Then he got another call and said, are you sure? Why don't you go? The guy says, why don't you go down and take a look and see what they have already done? And you can meet this guy, Jim Henson. So Bob took a chance, went down to the studio where they were doing some of the footage and stuff. And he met up with Jim Henson after seeing the footage. He liked what was going on. And he thought, I went in there not wanting to do it, and I walked out eager and ready to do it. I think he felt that there was a good feeling about it. And I think a lot of it has to do with the chemistry of Jim Henson and his Muppets, and the chemistry between the Muppets and the monsters and the giant yellow bird. And I think it's rather sad that Sesame Street wants to put parental advisory warnings on older episodes because they don't match up with today's current standards. I think when HBO took things over, it really put things into a whole different ballgame. It put a big black mark on HBO. And it put a big black mark on Sesame Workshop, something that most fans will never forgive them for. I just think it's rather sad that a television show that was broadcast over the Public Broadcasting Service, or PBS, as they now call it, or PBS Kids, as they now call it. It used to be streamed for free over the air to help those in less than favorable areas. There's a lot of kids in many neighborhoods that are struggling with their education. A lot of them don't have the access to really start their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. And Sesame Street was that. But then when HBO took things over, the people that get HBO, they get first dibs on the episodes. And the new episodes that they see on PBS have already been aired on HBO. And it kind of ruins it for everybody. And when they heard that Bob McGrath, Emilio Delgado, and Roscoe Orman were let go from the television show, there was a big outcry of anger and disappointment. And I'm one of those. I said, how could you do that? There's a lot of them that gave their careers to be a part of this experiment. Well, I hate to say it, but corporate greed really sucks. HBO couldn't or wouldn't want to pay people like Bob McGrath and Roscoe Orman and Emilio Delgado. Let's see, in 2017, Bob and them were given their walking papers. Let's see. Bob was about, let's see, 85. Emilio was 75. And I don't know how old Roscoe Orman was, but I know Sonia Manzano retired. So, yeah. Sonia Manzano retired and is now working on the television show Alma's Way. Yeah. So she's doing something to maybe like put a children's museum in her old neighborhood where she grew up. And that's a lot of ambition, you know. Now, there's a woman that gave almost her entire life to Sesame Street. She's been around for most of the 50 years. So, yeah. You know, and I'm going to be looking up things for Bob McGrath. And I found something on Sonia Manzano and her early life. And let's just say parts of her early life weren't so sunny. And I found a feature film with Roscoe Orman and some of the playlists that are featured below on the channel here. But I'm working on a tribute to Bob McGrath. It's going to take me a little while to snap it together. I'm trying to think of some ideas, like some funny moments with Bob. And I think I'll put in another street scene, some of which you may have already seen solo-wise on the channel. But I want to do something grand and be able to honor Bob properly. Because I've only seen maybe like one video that talked about in depth in his career. You know, and thank goodness for that, because he talks about, you know, this person that I found talked about his career and him going in the service. I think he was drafted into the Army for a couple of years. And then he came back and started making plans to marry his wife, which they got married in 1958. And then Mitch Miller came along, and the rest is history. You know, and then he went over to Japan even after the show had been canceled. You know, over in Japan, Bob was some serious hot property. And then he came back hoping to get a music career going here in the States. And then Sesame Street kind of came his way. So, yeah. So, you know, it's just one of those things. You know, Bob McGrath was a beautiful soul. There's just no way to describe it. You know, you take one look at him, you know, most times things were going to be good when he was on screen. You know, like when Barkley first came on the scene, you know, there's a scene where Oscar has a trigger word to play a gag on Bob, you know, to get Barkley to go crazy and do maybe like what Dino does on the Flintstones. But somehow Bob turns his little gag against Oscar. And as Barkley is licking Oscar in the can, McGrath is trying to say his lines and he's almost falling over laughing. So I'll have to put some of the funny moments in there and some heartfelt moments in Sesame Street. You know, and I think Bob deserves a proper tribute, and I'm hoping within maybe tomorrow or let's see. I think tomorrow or Monday, I'm hoping to have the tribute video done by at least Monday. Hopefully, I can do him justice. Bob certainly deserves to be remembered because to me, he's a big one. There was just something about Bob that kids connected to, and he deserves to be remembered. I don't care what Sesame Workshop says. He should be remembered, and that's the way it's going to be. Because as far as I know, he didn't have a public memorial service, which was a bit sad, but I understand. Bob was a nice man, but I think he was very, very private. And I think that's good. And the last time that I saw Bob was on the memorial for Carol Spinney. And, when Carol died, they had a lot of the Sesame Street cast there and family and friends. But Bob got up to speak at that service, and he just did not look well. And I've seen other pictures of him, and he was on a cane, and he even went by the old Kaufman Astoria Studios for old time's sake. And I know he did a Comic-Con thing just before Emilio died. And that's the scary thing. Emilio died 9 months before Bob did. And when I heard Emilio died, you know how like you ask the voice thing for Alexa, and I asked who died, and Emilio's name came up. And I had to ask it again. And his name came up again, and it caught me in mid-step. And then something tells me, it was like, I wonder who's going to be next. And it just gave me a really bad chill that I have never felt before. Then when I heard about the Comic-Con, I wanted to take part in that, but I really didn't have the funds for that. Because at that time I was going through a lot in terms of health and having wheelchair problems and just trying to get things done and taken care of. And then add on top of that the pandemic. So, yeah. These last few years have really sucked. When Bob McGrath died, it was just such a shock. I didn't know how to process it. And I met him a couple of times. Nice gent. I can't remember much about what we said to each other because it was over maybe almost 30 years ago. So I just remember him being very nice and congenial. I met him at the Ohio State Fair in 1993. He was on a concert tour with Frank Capelli and Alvin and the Chipmunks. It was like a triple bill. And I just remember Bob being very nice, and I got to meet the Chipmunks. Of course, we all know they're people in costumes, so it was fun. The second time I saw Bob McGrath in person was at an auto show, probably down at the Columbus Convention Center. So I remember going to bed one night when I still had my room down in my basement. And I was climbing into my waterbed to go to sleep, and then I heard that Bob McGrath was coming to town. And I remember my mom and I almost getting into a full-blown argument. I said, I want to go down there and see him. I don't care if it is for kids. I want to go and see him. So I went down there and saw him. And he sang some songs and talked with people. And I think I was one of the last ones he talked to. He had me go off to the side so we could talk. Then one year, my local library had, I used to go to Reynoldsburg Library, which is now being in the process of being built up as a new building. But back in the 90s, I used to go to Reynoldsburg Library all the time and borrow CDs and tapes and books. You know, I remember when they came out with those book cassette kits that were so prevalent back in the day of some Sesame Street books, and they had some with Bob McGrath. I think they were called Bob's Books, and it had stories like Dog Lies, The Shoveler, I'm a Good Mommy, You're a Good Daddy, Mr. Sneakers, and so on. I think I still have some of the tapes, but I'll have to have my brother go down through and see if he could find them and get them digitized so I could find a place to share them with my viewing audience. I think it's a shame because those books were put out by Price Stern Sloan, and they're very hard to find. Believe me, I've been trying to look for more copies of those book cassette kits. And I went over to my local mall at Eastland in Columbus, which is now closed permanently, by the way. They used to have a dollar store in there where the bridal shop was around the time the mall closed. Where the bridal shop was used to be a dollar store that sold everything from kids' puzzles like Alvin and the Chipmunks and old Atari games. For those of you that don't know Atari, look up Mr. Hooper Mr. Hooper Atari. And it has Will Lee playing the grandfather, learning how to play Pac-Man. That was one of the last things Will Lee did before he passed. Plus, Will Lee also did commercials for Ocean Spray. And Bob did commercials for Burger King and I think Joy dishwashing liquid. So it's a trip. There's a lot of things I could talk about in terms of Bob, but I think his kindness radiated off of him. And there's something that I think Bob said, that he went into Sesame Street just as a singer, but it was Will Lee who taught him, how to interact with children, and not talk down to them, not patronize them. And he gave him like some acting lessons just so he could make his role more believable on the show. And believe me, I think it worked. Because there's one episode that he did in the 90s that tore me up big time. That tore me up. There's a dog that comes to Sesame Street. This is when Around the Corner was introduced. And there was a dog that came onto Sesame Street. I think the dog's name was Renata Scotty, who was looking for a piano player and someone to throw a stick. And Big Bird, being the good bird that he is, hears her sing a couple of arias, some spoofs of classic arias. And she tells the big yellow bird what she wants in an accompanist. And she gives him a few little things, and he goes down through them, and he goes, I know who could play for you, my friend Bob. And he goes through the whole audition process, even going as far as to throw the stick for the irritating little puppy. and he gets the job. But then Big Bird realizes that his best friend in the whole planet is going to leave Sesame Street. And in fact, he had to pack right away because they were getting ready to go to the airport to start his tours. So Bob's packing, and Big Bird's sad, and Renata tries to put his mind at ease and says, well, you can write to him, you can call him anytime you want, and so on and so forth. And by the end, Big Bird's trying to be strong for everybody. Maria says, goodbye, Bob, we'll be thinking of you. And Gordon is just as sad. He's like, it won't be the same around here without you. And Ruthie doesn't want to say goodbye. And Big Bird's just saying, we could write him, we could call him anytime we want. He's not going to be gone for good. But Bob is very subdued by the end of the episode. And just as he's getting ready to leave, Big Bird says, bye, Bob. Don't forget to write, Bob. And I don't know if it was Bob being quiet or Big Bird almost breaking down to get me crying. And I saw that one back when I was working for the Red Cross office, or volunteering for the Red Cross. I would tape the show, and sometimes during the week, I would play the tape during the week and watch it to get the weekend off to a good start. First time I saw that episode, I cried my eyes out. And just as Bob gets ready to go, he decides that he can't go. He would be too sad. He would miss his friends too much. But he puts in a brilliant line. He says, I know of somebody who could play for you. I have a friend by the name of Rolf. I can give him a call. I'll be more than happy to do it. And that's when we learned that Bob was not going to leave Sesame Street. But I put it up and I watched it again, and this time it just felt different. Even though on the show we know he stays, but in reality, I think reality hit me in the face like a Mack truck or a cement truck. That our Bob is completely gone. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. And I wish I had stayed in contact with him because not only did I check out Bob's books, I checked out his CDs, and the Sing Me a Story album, when it was originally released, had an address in the cover where you could send Bob a letter. And that began a 3+ year correspondence with Bob. I love this guy so much that back in the day, I went as far as to invite him to my 23rd birthday. My twin brother and I were going to be 23, and I thought he might not be able to come, but I'm going to try and invite him. So I did. I got a birthday card, but she said he was too busy to come to the party. And I asked him one question. There was a book that his wife had written called Tony's Tunnel. And I asked him, I said, there was an Anne Sperry McGrath. Is she your wife? And he's like, yeah, is that where you saw her name? And I'm like, yep. I sent him cards, letters, and even a fun little drawing of him as a superhero. Kind of like Super Grover. But I took a picture from a coloring book, sketched it, colored it completely in, and sent it to him. He thought that was really cool. And one letter came that really put me down, put my soul in the down, for a while, where his wife said, he's very busy. He's got a torn rotator cuff, and I have to tie his shoes, help him get dressed, tie his shoes, and help cut up certain foods for him. But he's not going to be able to write to you very much. He doesn't write very much. And you're going to have to accept that as part of reality, is what she said. And of course, I felt a little hurt. And my mom says, well, you could still write. She says you could still write. And I said, well, I'll think about it. I went into my room, curled up on my bed, and just went to my safe space. And I never did write him again because I didn't want to be a bother. So I think a little bit of those old feelings kind of came back when he died. Part of me was sad and part of me was angry, because I wonder what would have happened if I stayed in contact for over 30 years, but I didn't. I just couldn't. So these last couple of months, I've been dealing with my own crap, trying to get my cholesterol under control and getting my wheelchair fixed and not be so stressed. And then when I take care of a few of the things that I needed to take care of, I was finally able to slow down, because lately I'd been feeling run down anyway. So, just not feeling well and not eating much. And sometimes all I can eat is a little bit of that yogurt that Sesame Street puts out. The banana and apple yogurt, and apple and blueberry with Big Bird on it. Otherwise, I hadn't eaten much, and just my whole system was screwed up. And then when I saw the Renata Scotti episode, the one about the opera dog, that's when the dam burst. I couldn't stop crying for the life of me. I guess that's when reality just hits you. And there was a famous line that John Ritter said in a film called The Comeback Kid. He says, I feel like I've been smashed in the face. If you don't know what the Comeback Kid movie was, it's a movie about a baseball player who is kind of on the down and out. And so he ends up having to, he gets a job being a coach to a bunch of scrappy inner city kids. And one of those little kids ends up getting hit by a car and dies from his injuries. And the scene is very palpable, It's like, some of the kids were like, I wonder who it's going to happen to next. One kid talks about a turtle that he adopted. And the guy he bought it from said the turtle was only going to live 2 or 3 months, and it's been several years. And he's afraid when the turtle dies, he's going to miss him. And that's when John Ritter's character, Bubba Newman, says, sometimes you have to be strong. But he says, man, I feel like I've just been smashed in the face. And it's, he's basically saying it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. Nobody said you had to cry. But, I kind of went through that shock, anger, and you kind of think, nah, that didn't happen. And that's how it felt when Bob passed. I thought, nah, he can't be gone. He was just at a GalaxyCon convention with his best friend, Emilio, and other members of the Muppet cast, And it was like, boom, Emilio went, and then Bob, 9 months later. Doesn't seem fair, doesn't seem right, but we got to keep going. And that's what this channel is about. I want to keep the memories alive. I want people to come in and talk about Bob McGrath. I want to hear some stories for those that may have met the guy. And he told a story about a little boy who walked up to him and took his hand, and the kid says, "I know who you are." And that's the kind of effect that Bob had on a lot of people. Grown women walking up to him and saying what the show meant to them when he was on. And grown women crying. And, back in the day, there was a certain magic about Sesame Street. You don't understand it when you're a kid, but you sure understand it when you're in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. So just think about it. A lot of people are angry that HBO and Sesame Workshop did members of the cast really dirty. They wanted to reorganize the show or cut it down to a half an hour, but they didn't want to bother with the contracts. And that is the biggest mistake in the HBO takeover of Sesame Street. Not only do people that get HBO get dibs on the episodes first, but it kind of defeats the purpose of what PBS had started out for, It should be broadcast free over the air, especially for those that can't afford cable. They could buy an antenna today for like $50. But not a lot of people can afford cable. Things are high enough as it is. But as I've said, I want to keep this channel open for older Sesame Street grads that watch the show. They could share their memories. They could critique the episodes. They could think of whether Bob wasn't, Bob Johnson, the character, was an asshole, or they could talk about their favorite actor, or they could talk about the untimely passing of Will Lee or Olivia, or even the guy who played David. So, yeah. Because, as they say, not all days are sunny. There was a piece that I did find on Sonia Manzano. You could look down through some of the playlists for that, where she talks about her life growing up, and some of it is actually pretty dark, but I think I'll leave that for you to look at. If I find anything on Bob McGrath, I'll be sure to post any links in the videos as I find them. I'll just decide on which ones to put the links on. So maybe when I go through my playlist or my videos, I'll find the one with Bob McGrath talking about the last time he saw his friend Will Lee. But this channel is set up to keep the memories alive for future generations. Because I've learned a long time ago, it's up to the fans to keep things like this going, especially if it's something that we really care about. And damn it, I care about Mr. Hooper, Bob Johnson, Olivia, Susan, Gordon, even that grouchy little bastard, Oscar, and a nice, kindly yellow bird named Big Bird. That's what I want to remember. So if you guys want to join this channel, feel free. I don't have a Patreon. I don't do this shit for money. I do it for the love of the show, and I do it for the love of some of my favorite Muppet characters and Bob McGrath is my ultimate favorite. But you will see some stuff on Emilio Delgado in the future, and maybe some with Olivia. And maybe if I find some of her, some clips of her on 227, I'll be sure to share them either here or on my page that is dedicated to Sesame Street on Facebook. So if I could figure out how to put the link to Facebook on YouTube, I'll be sure to take care of that in the future. Right now, I'm just trying to figure out my new setup on Windows 10 and try and get the channel up and running so we could have a good, earnest, honest discussion. So I'm going to call this one finished. It's about 9:30 in the evening and I'm tired. Please light a candle for your favorite Sesame Street human or Muppet. And let's not forget the HBO Max deal and the Disney deal. Let's see, the Disney deal, it took Kermit the Frog away from Sesame Street. A lot of kids might not know that Kermit the Frog was on some of the earliest episodes of Sesame Street. And the Disney deal robbed us of Kermit. And the HBO deal robbed us of our favorite neighbors of Sesame Street. And the one guy I feel sorry for these days is Alan. And I can't think of the other young man that's on there now. And I think Martin P. Robinson is still around as Snuffleupagus. But the show just isn't the same. So let me know what you all think. I'm getting ready to get off here and head to bed. And hopefully within about another 2 to 3 days, I'll have that tribute video ready for Bob. So don't lose hope on me yet. You'll see some street scenes, and maybe I'll put together some heartfelt moments from Bob and some funny moments from Bob. But the street scenes that'll probably be in the tribute will be uploaded to this channel so we could all talk about it. So I think since it is my channel, we should be able to talk about it, being that we are the older generation. So, yeah. Let's keep the flame alive. Please remember Will Lee, Emilio Delgado, Bob McGrath, and the late, great Jim Henson, Richard Hunt, and whoever else has passed from the show. So, yeah. Keep them in your thoughts as we go through this year and beyond. Remember, it is up to us to keep the flame alive for Sesame Street. Fight for it. See if we can get the stories out on DVD properly. No parental warnings things. And trust me, there won't be much of Elmo on this channel, that's for sure. Because I think back in the day, each Muppet had equal airtime. You know, just like back in the day, Bob was not on every day. You know, they have like a certain amount of people on the stage for each show they do. So it was very rare to see all the main characters from Sesame Street on one set. And the Goodbye Mr. Hooper one, it was the gold standard. So, granted, it was very sad, but it set a gold standard. Nowadays, it's all about those little puppets and the red miscreant that they call Elmo. Well, have a good night, everybody, and I'll talk to you guys again really, really soon. Light a candle for Bob and your favorite cast members. So, all right, take care of yourselves and each other, and spread the love that Bob would have spread. So, yeah, we could use more Bobs in the world. So, Take care of yourselves. Bye.